Welcome, everybody, to another episode of I Would Say Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the man in charge over at CF After Dark. Um, we're going to keep this fairly short tonight, just because Iowa State, both men and women, play in about an hour. So we're going to try to make sure we get wrapped up in plenty of time so that everyone can move over to um, their game. So I wanted to present this idea today, because earlier this week, or I guess this past weekend, I should say, Brett Yormark made the comment during one of the basketball games. I can't remember which one. Basically, teasing that the Big 12 was getting ready to announce a big. They had a big announcement. It was supposed to come today. Now it's coming tomorrow. And didn't really hint at exactly what it was, but essentially said it's going to be revolutionary for the sport. Nobody's ever done it. All this. And after having some time to kind of think about it a little bit, kind of just talk to some people about it and kind of float some ideas. Now, I'm not sure exactly what it'll be for basketball. It could be a format change to the conference tournament, or it could be they could be adding a revenue sharing component to the Big 12 tournament, something like that. Could be a few different things that way. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. I don't really have any inside scoop on what that is. I'm curious to see what it's going to be tomorrow. But one thing I think would be interesting that I think you could do. I think you could pull this off for Big 12 football. Because Yormark's philosophy since taking over the Big 12 has always been trying to be one step ahead of the curve. He's trying to be they're trying to be they're trying to evolve before they need to evolve type of thing. They're trying to stand out from the crowd a little bit, do things a little bit differently, and establish itself as that Big 12 isn't messing around, because they're going to go out and try to do things a little bit different. They're going to zig when everyone else zags type of thing. And I respect that. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you come up with some kooky stuff and it doesn't quite stick. You throw some stuff against the wall to see what happens. We've heard, we've heard, we've heard from a number of people about, or we've heard a number of times about, playing games overseas, playing basketball games in Mexico City, things like that. Just, and I, maybe those are coming, but I kind of do think, at least part of it getting floated by Yormark is just to kind of see what the people think. And I respect the hell out of that, because he's trying to do a job that, the Big 12 has a different problem than everybody else, because they've got all these new members, and you're trying to solidify yourself as the third conference in college football. Like, you're just not going to be able to pass the Big 10 and the SEC. You're just not going to be able to. Just from a number of different, not necessarily just on the field, but I'm just talking in terms of revenue, prestige, all that stuff. You're not going to be able to pass the Big 10 and the SEC. But you can clearly establish yourself as the third best conference ahead of the ACC, which has plenty of its own problems, including, two of its biggest members trying to leave in Florida State and Clemson. So, we'll see kind of how that thing pans out. But I've got a couple ideas, and I specifically one big idea, I think, for the Big 12 that I think could be really interesting for football to help kind of set it apart a little bit. Trax wants to know, what is our panic level about the literal release of Rodgers' contract? He still isn't finalized 60 days in. Not like a 0.1, I would say. If this was going to be an issue, like, if anything was going to be an issue, Jimmy Rodgers wouldn't have spent the last 2 months putting together a transfer class and a recruiting class. They have a legally binding verbal agreement to start these things out. And then it's months of, of the university and the lawyers basically hashing out every single little revision and detail that they can find. And sometimes it's as silly as like a clause that says, we will, that Jimmy Rodgers will be paid X dollars per week and over the course of this many weeks or whatever it is, and the lawyers want to stipulate it says it will be direct deposited every week or something like that. Like it's little stuff like that. And anybody that's ever dealt with any sort of lawyer, any sort of attorney in any situation, knows that like that kind of stuff just takes forever. Just it takes days to make these little tiny revisions, and they go read it again, they find another revision, and they go read it again, they find another revision. So no, the answer is no. I'm not really worried about. I'm not worried at all about the contract situation just because they haven't got anything signed yet. It's you know those things can take months. But when you're talking about that kind of money and you're talking about like just the current landscape of college athletics, um, it's just yeah, I'm not concerned about it. I believe if I remember correctly, Matt Campbell and TJ Otzelberger both took a while to get contracts signed. So I don't know if that's a if it's just normal for Iowa State or if it's normal for Jamie Pollard or if it's just normal across the sport. I'm not sure, I guess, but um, there is a track record of this happening at Iowa State at least. So I'm not personally concerned about it as of right now. But going forward, I think there's a couple things that the Big 12 needs to do to gain some sort of national exposure or like just I hate to use the word respect because it kind of to a certain degree it can sound just like saying like we get no respect. That's kind of it kind of gives some like little man syndrome vibes. But it sort of is respect in that it's like they needed or like in order to gain a greater benefit of the doubt maybe is the right way is the better way to describe it, where it's saying like, oh, if in the case of the Big 12 versus another conference in this situation, it's always not the Big 12 because the Big 12 is this and this. And it is to a certain extent some respect, but it's also just being uh you know given some benefit of the doubt when you're comparing teams and things like that, where it's like the Big 12 champion and the Big 10 fourth place team or something like that, where it's like, well, the Big 10 is just so far ahead that the fourth place team is just automatically better than the Big 12 champion, stuff like that. Um, but I think one thing that I would that the Big 12 can do, there's a couple things that the Big 12 can do to help set it apart. Um, One of the things I would like to see them do, and I think that you could do, is find more ways to include revenue sharing opportunities for the athletes. We've already seen this past year. Iowa State played in the tournament in Vegas, where the players all got a cut of the winnings and all that. And Iowa State kind of got screwed out of it because the players essentially lost out on money because of some weird tiebreaker scenarios for that tournament, even though they had a record to play in the championship game. But whether that's in exhibition games, it's in non-con games, or whatever it is, the Big 12 should try to find more revenue sharing opportunities for players. Basketball, it's a little bit easier because they have these preseason tournaments and all that, and football just doesn't have those. But I think it would be very fun is if in the spring you have spring practice and a spring scrimmage, and then um, the conference organizes a spring game between two different schools, puts it on TV, and makes it kind of an official exhibition game. Puts it on TV, lets it be a revenue sharing opportunity for the players, and it gets some exposure to these teams, to other teams in the spring. And obviously, you treat it like a spring game. Maybe you have different rules. You have no contact rules, things like that. But I like in the spring have Iowa State play, I don't know, pick one, Colorado, TCU, Oklahoma State, whatever, and everybody gets a spring game matchup. I realize that's more it's an extra travel thing, but it's one game, it's a practice, something like that. Maybe you have everybody fly down to Jerry World, and um you play spring game. You play 3 spring games a day for a weekend or something like that, or 4 spring games a day, for a weekend, or 2 on Friday night, 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, that type of thing. and just play, 10-minute quarters or just two 15-minute halves, whatever it is. Get them on the field, let them play a spring game against each other. You can get it on TV. You can get more revenue sharing opportunity for this. I think that'll be a really interesting way because then you can put actual Big 12 football on the field and on TV in the spring, which I think is really interesting. The other component of this, and I think the big thing that I would like to see, if I like the way you can make this really fun, is I would like to see the Big 12. I would like to see them replace the 12th game in the season with a conference championship game semifinal or slash a curated final game. So the last game of the season remains like the opponent and location are to be determined at the beginning of the season. And as we get closer, we kind of get this figured out a little bit. But then once you get to say the week after Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving weekend, whatever it is, do the weekend before Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter. You are going to seed everybody 1 through 16. The top 4 seeds are going to play their 12th game this is the 12th game of the regular season. This is still a regular season game. The 12th game of the regular season is seeded. So like this past season, it went Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, Houston. And so Texas Tech would have been the 1 seed, Houston the 4 seed, BYU the 2, Utah the 3. And then they play an on-campus conference championship game semifinal. And then then the winners go to Arlington to play in the conference championship game. Anybody that's not in that playoff is going to play a game against the team seated immediately next to it. So in this case, Arizona would have played Arizona State. Cincinnati plays TCU. Iowa State plays Kansas State. Baylor plays Kansas. UCF plays West Virginia. Colorado plays Oklahoma State. What you're doing there is getting competitive matchups. You're getting matchups that should produce good, close, competitive games. And you can, look at that standings though. You've got the Holy War in a conference championship game semifinal. You've got Arizona State. So you've got a rivalry there. You've got Farmageddon that last week. Could be a rematch of Farmageddon depending on when you played that game. Which last year it would have been they played in Dublin, then they would have played again in the semifinal, which I think is kind of fun. Baylor and Kansas, UCF, West Virginia, Colorado, Oklahoma State. You get some competitive matchups there where Colorado and Oklahoma State aren't getting blown out by whoever at the end of the season. They can play a game that they have a shot at winning, and then Arizona and Arizona State, who just missed out on the top 4 and on the conference championship game semifinal, get to play. So they all have a chance to get to add another quality win to their resume against a team that's about as good as they are, which I think would have been really, really fun. It gets you a playoff situation in the regular season that draws eyeballs because it's like, okay, the winner of these games goes to the conference title game. The rest of these are competitive matchups that are worth watching. Is Colorado, Oklahoma State the sexiest matchup? Probably not, but is Colorado and TCU any sexier? Is Oklahoma State and Arizona any sexier? Not really. It was still top of the conference, or upper half than the worst team in the conference. They're not any worse, but at least, that gives Oklahoma State a chance to, it gives them a chance to play a team that they are at least in the same realm of. UCF, West Virginia would have been a competitive game. Kansas and Baylor. I just really think this gives you a great opportunity to get lots of extra eyes on you at the end of the season. And so far, the tiebreakers have produced some interesting results. 2024, we had that crazy tiebreaker coming at the end. Obviously, Iowa State obviously came out at the end of it, and it was kind of a fun 12th hour thing, but it was based on about 9 different things. It's not just head to head, but it's like if it's a 3-way tie, then it's a round robin thing. And then there's a million other layers to this thing. And you're going to have some of those. Your tiebreakers are still going to be involved there to find playoff seeding or, to find, conference playoff seeding. But it's not going to be quite as big a deal where you're like trying to find two teams. If you have four teams there, you don't have to add a game to the regular season. You don't have to do anything, but all you're doing is curating good matchups right there in the last week of the season, right when it matters the most. So I think that's really, really interesting. I think that'd be a fun way to do this. It's a reason for people to, for people around the country to tune in because then they can see a playoff happening in real time, basically. And you could find a way if you wanted to play that 12th week and play if you wanted to put those two semifinal games at Jerry World, you could, I guess. Um, and play them as a neutral site semifinal if you want, you could, I suppose. And then do that as a revenue sharing option for the players. But on campus is fine too. I really like that idea. It's something that has not even come close to being like proposed on a large scale to anything. And I mean, we're talking about the SEC is still trying to, I don't know if the SEC is moving up to a ninth game anytime soon or not. Um, if you're already going to play, if you're already going to play an extra conference game, make it against a team that you're roughly competitive with, and give more teams a shot to make it in. You know, I think that's really fun. I really, really like that idea. If you go back to 2024, if you went to 2024, that makes us even more interesting because, um, let's see here. Yeah, because 2024 would have been Iowa State, Colorado, BYU, and Iowa State in that semifinal. All of those were tied at 7-2. So you had all the teams tied for first place, then moving, instead of that, the last time, the kind of that crazy last week, all four of those just go straight to a semifinal. And Arizona State would be playing Colorado, I think. I'd have to remember what the exact situation going into the final week was, but I think it would be Arizona State playing Colorado, Iowa State playing BYU, and the winners of those games goes into the conference championship game. I think that'd been really fun. Arizona State probably still beats Colorado there, but Iowa State and BYU hadn't played that year. They didn't play it all in 2024. So you get some fun things going on there. Then, outside of that, you've got a TCU Baylor matchup. You've got Texas Tech and Kansas State, West Virginia and Kansas. Yeah, you've got some fun games in there. And somehow near the bottom, you have a Utah Arizona game farther down there, which obviously 2024, neither team was that good, but kind of an interesting matchup considering where they ended up getting to. But I really like this as an option here. It's something different. It's not something quirky or gimmicky in that it delegitimizes anything. It doesn't delegitimize the regular season, doesn't delegitimize the conference in any way, but it basically just creates better matchups in the last week. So you don't have a situation where you're going into the last week of the season, you got two teams on a tiebreaker, and basically, if one of them wins, the other one gets in. If one of them wins, they get in. If the other one wins, they get in, type of thing. But one team plays Oklahoma State, and the other one plays, and the other one plays Houston or something like that, where they're, one team's playing a bad team, one team's playing a good team, and it's literally just it's just the balance of the schedules that's going to be a huge determining factor in which one gets in. But if you get to that point of the season where they're basically tied, put them in a semifinal. They've both clearly earned the right to be there. Put them in a semifinal and let them play each other, or let them play their way into the conference championship game, rather than, relying on some silly set of tiebreakers to figure out which two of four tied teams are going to go into the title game. I mean, that in itself is kind of nonsense. So let's just do it as a playoff. If you want to do it as a neutral site game, do it that way. Play at Jerry World, or play it at the Alamo Dome, or play it in Vegas, or play it wherever you want. Play it at Arrowhead, and you can turn it into a revenue sharing opportunity for the players. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And that's how you can set the Big 12 apart doing it that way. And I think it's a really fun idea. Um, you know, I there'll be a lot of other future ways to do this. I don't think that just like blindly, slapping games in Mexico City or Tokyo or Toronto or wherever, Germany or what, I don't think that just randomly slapping games in other countries is necessarily the right move. The Iowa State Kansas thing in Ireland, Kansas State thing in Ireland was a little unique because that's a rivalry game and it was part of a neutral site game that already exists. So it's not like they took a game and just put it in a different country just cuz. I mean, it was part of a thing. And, where the, you know, where the opening kickoff game in Ireland, where they reached out to them. They reached out to Iowa State about trying to make this happen, and Kansas State just happened to work out. And they put a conference game there. But if you're doing it like in Germany or something like that, you're having to make a new game, you're having to make a new event, and just be like, oh, we're gonna just slap this thing at Allianz Arena in Munich, and we're just gonna figure it out and hope people show up, type of thing. Which there's certain schools that would absolutely send the fan base over, and there's some that absolutely wouldn't. Like I would not send a, I probably would not send a Baylor Cincinnati game to Munich. Probably wouldn't do that. I don't think you'd get a lot of traveling fans to that. Could you pull off a BYU Utah game in Toronto, Canada? Maybe, but it's kind of weird. I don't think that the neutral site games are a viable publicity thing going forward. I mean, they're interesting, I guess, but I mean, as we saw this year for Iowa State and Kansas State, traveling internationally, playing internationally, and then coming back and playing again right away the next week can cause a lot of problems. It can cause a significant amount of problems to the rest of your season. So teams just won't be that excited about. They won't be very excited about going and doing those things. They're not going to want to go to Munich for a week 2 game or something like that and play a conference game over there and have to come back and then play somebody else in non-con. They're not going to want to do that. So you find other ways that don't just involve random dumb neutral site games that nobody likes anyways. Another thing I'm not exactly sure how you implement this, but I would like to see the Big 12 find a structure to incentivize teams to find interesting non-con opponents, to find quality non-con opponents. That doesn't mean that Iowa State has to give up Iowa. I mean, because Iowa is typically a quality Power 5 non-conference opponent. But we don't need to see Texas Tech blasting Abilene Christian and Houston Baptist for 3 games in the non-con and then showing up to the Big 12 conference. If you're going to play, I mean, if you win your conference, you win your, go undefeated in the Big 12 and all that. Great. I mean, you've earned your right in there, but I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can work it into a tiebreaker or if you literally reward some sort of revenue sharing prize to the players for beating Power 5 non-conference teams, but then you can reward scheduling and winning these non-conference games against other conferences. And which a lot of times national experts will use, like, what's the Big 12's record against other Power 5 conferences? And they'll use that to compare how that went. It's actually funny because last year, I believe the Big 12 was the only conference that ended up with a winning record against other Power 5 conferences. So that was kind of interesting. But, I think they should try to find a way to incentivize that and try to get it so that way everybody's picking up at least one Power 5 non-conference opponent, because some of them just don't do it. So I would like them to try to figure out a way to make that happen.